Chapter 21 of The Beloved Vagabond by William John Locke. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 21. Paris again. Jeannot's. The organised confusion of the studio. The boisterous comradeship of my coevals. A Monday morning throng of models in all stages of non-état crowding the staircases. The noisy café over the way. The restaurant Didier, where those of us, young men and maidens, who had princely incomes, dined marvellously for £1.50, vin compris. Such wine! I rise sympathetically at its memory. The squabbles, the new romances, the new slang on the tip of everyone's tongue. The studio in Menilmontant, where the four of us slaved at never-to-be-purchased masterpieces. The dear, full-blooded, inspiring life again. Paris, too, which meant the Rue des Saladiers, and Blanquette and Narcisse, and the grace of dear familiar things. It must not be counted to me for ingratitude that I was glad to be back. I was still a boy, under 20. My pockets bulged with the banknotes into which I had converted Mrs. Rushworth's cheque, and I found myself master of infinite delight. I presented Blanquette with a tortoiseshell comb, and Narcisse with a collar, and I electrified my intimate and less fortunate friends by giving them a dinner in the dismal entresol at Didier's, which was superbly styled the Salle des Banquets. Fanchette, and one or two of her colleagues, being of the party, I fear we behaved in a disreputable manner. If Melford had looked on, it would have blushed to the top of its decorated spire. We put the table aside and danced eccentric quadrilles. We shouted roistering songs. When Cazalet tried to sing a solo, we held him down and gagged him with his own sandals. We flirted in corners. A goodly portion of Rosaria, a Spanish model born and bred in the Quartier Saint-Antoine, we washed in red wine. It was a memorable evening. The next day Blanquette listened with great interest to my expurgated account of the proceedings, and in her good unhumorous way prescribed for my headache. When one is young, such a night is worth a headache. I am unrepentant, even though I am old and the almond tree flourishes and the grasshopper is trying to be a nuisance. I don't like your oldsters who pretend to be ashamed of the follies of their youth. They are humbugs all. There is no respectable elderly gentleman in the land who does not inwardly chuckle over the chimes he has heard at midnight. Though I always had Joanna's gracious personality at the back of my mind, and the love of my good master as part of my spiritual equipment, yet I must confess to concerning my thoughts very little with the progress of their romance. I took it for granted, as I took many things in those unspeculative days. The actual whirl of Paris caught me and left me little time for conjecture. I wrote once or twice to Joanna, but my letters were egotistical outpourings. The mythological picture at Menilmontant inspired sheets of excited verbiage. She replied in her pretty, sympathetic way, but gave me little news of Paragot. It was hardly to be expected that she should write romantically, like a young girl foolishly in love, gushing to a bosom friend. Paragot himself, who disliked pen, ink, and paper, merely sent me the casual messages of affection through Joanna. He took the view of the duenna in Ruy Blas as to the adequacy of the king's epistle to the Queen. "Madame, it is very windy, and I have killed 6 wolves. Carlos." "What more was necessary?" asked the duenna. So did Paragot. When I was with Blanquette, I avoided the subject of the impending marriage as much as possible. She looked forward with dull fatalism to the day when another woman would take the master into her keeping, and her own occupation would be gone. "Blanquette, we shall go on living together just as we are doing now," I cried in the generosity of youth. "And when a woman comes and takes you too?" I swore insane vows of celibacy, but she laughed at me in her common-sense way, and uttered blunt truths concerning the weaknesses of my sex. "Besides, my little Asticot," she added, "I love you very much, you know that well, but you are not the master." Once I suggested the possibility of her marrying someone else. There was a cheerful quincaillier at the corner of the street who, to my knowledge, paid her assiduous attentions. He was evidently a man of substance and refinement, for a zinc bath was prominently displayed among his hardware. But Blanquette's love laughed at tinsmiths. She, who had lived on equal terms with the master and myself, I bowed my acknowledgment of the tribute, to marry a person without education? Ah, mais non, au grand non, merci. He was as scornful as you please, and, without rhyme or reason, plucked a bunch of Christmas roses from a jug on the table and threw them into the stove. Poor Cancelier! There was nothing for it but to se fiche à l'eau, to chuck herself into the river. That was the end of most of our conversations on the disastrous subject. It was the end of a talk on one November evening, about 3 weeks after I had returned to Paris. I had dined at home with Blanquette, and was in the midst of a drawing, which I blush to say I was doing for Le Fou Rire, an unprincipled comic paper, fortunately long since defunct. Fortunately? Tartuffe that I am! Many a welcome louis did I get from it in those necessitous days. When she looked up from her sewing, and asked when the master was coming back. The question led to an answer, the answer to an observation, and the observation to the discussion of the subject. There is no way out of it, mon pauvre Asticot. Je vais me fiche à l'eau, comme je l'ai dit. In the meanwhile, my dear, said I, throwing down the crow-quill pen and pushing in my drawing away, if you remain in this pestilential condition of morbidness, you will die without the necessity of drowning yourself. Instead of making ourselves miserable, let us go and dance at the Bal Jasmin. Veux-tu? This evening? She asked, startled. She had never grown accustomed to the suddenness of the artistic temperament. Of course this evening. You don't suppose I would ask you to dance next month, so as to cure you of indigestion tonight? But nothing is wrong with my stomach, mon cher, said the literal Blanquette. It is indigestion of the heart, said I, after the manner of Paragot, and dancing with me at the Bal Jasmin will be the best thing in the world for you. It would give you pleasure? This was charmingly said. It implied that she would sacrifice her feelings for my sake. But her eyes brightened, and her cheeks flushed a little. Women are rank hypocrites on occasion. 10 minutes later, Blanquette, wearing her black Sunday gown, set off by a blue silk scarf embroidered at the edges with a curious kind of pink forget-me-not, her hair, tidily coiled on top and fixed with my tortoise-shell comb, announced that she was ready. We started. In those days I did not drive to balls in luxurious hired vehicles. I walked, pipe in mouth, correctly giving my arm to Blanquette. No doubt everybody thought us lovers. It is odd how wrong everybody can be sometimes. The Bal Jasmin was situated in the Rue Mouffetard. It has long since disappeared with many a haunt of my youth's revelry. The tide of frolic has set northward, and Montmartre, which to us was but a geographical term, now dazzles the world with its venal splendour. But the Moulin de la Galette and the Bal Tabarin of the present day lack the gaiety of the Bal Jasmin. It was not well frequented. It gathered round its bandstand a people with shocking reputations. The sight of a man in a dress coat would have transfixed the assembly like some blood-curdling ghost. The ladies would have huddled together in a circle round the wearer and gazed at him open-mouthed. He would subsequently have had to pay for the ball's liquid refreshment. The Bal Jasmin did not employ meretricious ornament to attract custom. A low gallery containing tables ran around the bare hall, the balustrade being of convenient elbow height from the floor, so that the dancers, during intervals of rest, could lounge and talk with the drinkers. In the middle was a circular bandstand, where greasy musicians fiddled with perspiring zeal. At the doors the sergeant de ville stood good-humouredly and nodded to the ladies and gentlemen with whom he had a professional acquaintance. Everybody came to dance. If good fortune, such as a watch or a freshly subventioned student, fell into their mouths, they swallowed it like honest, sensible souls. But they did not make reprehensible adventure the main object of their evening. They danced the quadrilles, not for payment and the delectation of foreigners, as at the Jardin de Paris, but for their own pleasure. A girl kicked off your hat out of sheer kindness of heart and animal spirits, and if you waltzed with her, she danced with her strange little soul throbbing in her feet. There were, I say, the most dreadfully shocking people at the Bal Jasmin, but they could teach the irreproachable a lesson in the art of enjoyment. As I came with Blanquette and danced only with Blanquette, and sat with Blanquette over bock or syrup in the gallery, the unwritten etiquette of the place caused us to be undisturbed. Like the rest of the assembly, we enjoyed ourselves. Dancing was Blanquette's one supreme accomplishment. Old Père Paragot had taught her to play the zither indifferently well, but he had made her dance divinely, and Blanquette, I may here mention incidentally, had been my instructress in the art. Seeing her thick-set, coarse figure, and holding your arm around her solid waist as you waited for the bar, you would not have dreamed of the fairy lightness it assumed the moment feet moved in time with the music. If life had been a continuous waltz, no partner of hers less awkward than a rhinoceros could have avoided falling in love with her. But waltzes ended all too soon, and the thistledown sylph of a woman became my plain, homely Blanquette, uninspiring of romance save in the hardware bosom of the Concalier at the corner of the Rue des Saladiers. The bal was crowded. Gaunt, ill-shaven men, each a parody of one of the 7 deadly sins, capered grotesquely with daughters of Rahab in cheap hats and feathers. Shop assistants and neat, bare-headed work girls, students picturesquely long-haired and floppily trousered and cravated, and poorly clad models, a whole army of nondescripts, heaven knows with what means of livelihood, all dancing, drinking, eating, laughing, jesting, smoking, primitively love-making, moving, shouting, a phantasmagoria of skulls making merry beyond the pale of reputable life. Such were the frequenters of the Bal Jasmin. Gas flared in 2 concentric circles of flame around the hall and around the central bandstand. There was no ventilation. The bal sweltered in perspiration. Hollow-voiced abjects hawked penny paper fans between the dances, and the whole room was aflutter. Blanquette, who had forgotten tragedy for the time, sat with me at a table by the balustrade, and alternately sipped her syrup and water, and looked, full of interest, at the scene below, now and then clutching my arm to direct my attention to startling personalities. The light in her eyes and the colour in her coarse cheeks made her almost pretty. You have never seen ugliness in a happy face, and Blanquette was happy. "Don't you want to go and dance with any other petite femme?" she asked generously. "I will wait for you here." I declined with equal magnanimity to leave her alone. "Suppose some rapscallion came up and asked you to dance?" "I can take care of myself, mon petit Asticot," she laughed, bracing her strong arms. "And suppose I wanted to go off with him? They are amusing sometimes, people like that. There is one. Regarde-moi ce type-là." The type in question was a fox-faced young man, unwashed and collarless, wearing the peaked cap of Paris villainy. He crossed the hall accompanied by 2 of the brazenest hussies that ever emerged from the shadow of the fortifications. As they passed the sergeant de ville, they all cocked themselves with an air of braggadocio. "He makes me shiver," said I. Blanquette shrugged her shoulders. "One must have all sorts of people in the world, as there are so many things to make people different. It is only a chance that I have not become like those girls. It's no one's fault." "There, but by the grace of God goes John Bunyan," I quoted reflectively. "You are developing philosophy, Blanquette chérie, and your gentle toleration of the infamous does you credit. But only the master would get what isn't infamous out of them." The band struck up a waltz. Blanquette drank her syrup quickly and rose. "Come and dance." We descended, and were swept along in the whirl of ragamuffin, ill-conditioned couples, dancing every step in the tradition of Paris. Steering was no easy matter. After a while we were hemmed in near the side of the hall, and were just on the point of emerging from the crush, when the sound of a voice brought us to a dead stop, which caused us to be knocked about like a pair of footballs. "My good Monsieur Boubou de Levanquois, you do me infinite honour, but till I have devoured the proceeds of my last crime, I lead a life of elegant leisure." We escaped from danger, and reaching the side, stood and looked at each other in stupefaction. Blanquette was the first to see him. She seized my arm and pointed. "It is he! Sainte Vierge, it is he!" It was he. He was sitting at a table a few yards off, and his companions were the fox-faced youth and the 2 girls over whom Blanquette had philosophized. He wore his silk hat. Brandy was in front of him. He seemed to be on familiar terms with his friends. For a long time we watched him, fascinated, not daring to accost him, and yet unwilling to edge away out of his sight and make our escape from the ball. I saw that he was incredibly dirty. His beard of some days' growth gave him a peculiarly grim appearance. His hat had rolled in the mud and was everything a silk hat ought not to be. His linen was black. Never had the garb of respectability been so battered into the vesture of disrepute. Suddenly he caught sight of us. He hesitated for a moment, then waved us a bland, unashamed salutation. We went up to the nearest steps to the gallery and waited. After a polite leave-taking, he bowed to his companions and reeled towards us. I knew by the familiar gait that he'd had many cognacs and absinthes during the day. What in the name of sanity was he doing here? Mon Dieu, qu'est-ce qu'il fait ici? Asked Blanquette. I shook my head. It was stupefying. Eh bien, mes enfants, you have come to amuse yourselves, eh? I, too, in the company of my excellent friend Boubou le Vainqueur, whose acquaintance, together with that of his fair companions, I would not advise you to cultivate. But, master, I gasped, what has happened? I'll veil it, my son, said he, laying his hand on my shoulder, in the decent obscurity of a learned language. Canis reversus ad suum vomitum et sus lota involutabro luti. Oh, mon Dieu, sighed Blanquette again, as if it were something too appalling. But why, master? Why, Wallo, why not? And now, my little Blanquette, we will all go home and you shall make me some good coffee. Or do you want to stay longer and dance with Asticot? Oh, let us go away, master, said Blanquette, casting a scared glance at Boubou le Vainqueur, who was watching us with an interested air. Allons, said Paragot blandly. The dance stopped, and the thirsty crowd surged to the gallery. We threaded our way towards the door, and I thought, with burning cheeks, that the eyes of the whole assembly were turned to my master's mud-caked silk hat. It was a relief to escape from the noise and gaslight of the bal, which had suddenly lost its glamour, into the cool and quiet street. After we had walked a few yards in silence, he hooked his arms in Blanquette's and mine, and broke into a loud laugh. But it is astonishing, the age of you children. You might be 50 each of you, and I your little boy, whom you have discovered in an act of naughtiness and were bringing home. Really are you as displeased with me à ce point-là? C'est épatant. But laugh, my little Blanquette, are you not glad to see me? But yes, master, said Blanquette, it is like a dream. And you, Asticot of my heart? I find it a dream too. I can't understand. When did you leave Melford? Oh, about 5 days ago. I would tell you the day of the week, if I had the habit of exactness. And Madame de Verneuil? Is very well, thank you. After this rebuff, I asked no more questions. I remarked that the weather was still cold. Paragot laughed again. He's turned into a nice little bourgeois, hasn't he, Blanquette? He knows how to make polite conversation. He's tidy in his habits in the Rue des Saladiers, eh? He does not spit on the floor or spill absinthe over the counterpane. Ha! Je suis un vieux salaud, eh? Don't say no. And Narcisse? It is he who would be contented to see you, cried Blanquette, and so are we all. Ah oui, en effet, je suis contente. She heaved a great sigh, as though she had awakened from the nightmare of seeing herself a dripping corpse in the morgue. It is no longer the same thing when you are not in the house. Truly I am happy, master. You can't understand. There was a little throb in her voice which Paragot seemed to notice, for as he bent down to her, his grip of my arm relaxed, and I suppose his grip of hers tightened. It gives you such pleasure that I come back, my little Blanquette? He said tenderly. I craned my head forward and saw her raise her faithful eyes to his and smile as she pronounced her eternal "Oui, maître." It is only Asticot who does not welcome the prodigal father. I protested. He laughed away my protestations. Then suddenly he stopped and drew a long breath and gazed at the tall houses whose lines cut the frosty sky into a straight strip. Ah, how good it smells! How good it is to be in Paris again! The door of a marchand de vin swung open just by our noses to give exit to a reveller, and the hot, poisoned air streamed forth. And how good it is, the smell of alcohols! I could kiss the honest sot who has just reeled out and is skating across the road. À bas les bourgeois! He did not carry out his unpleasing desire, but when we reached the salon of the Rue des Saladiers, and we had lit the lamp, he kissed Blanquette on both cheeks, still crying out how good it was to be back. Narcisse, mad with delight, capered about him and barked his rapture. He did not in the least mind a master lapsed from grace. Paragot threw himself on a chair, his hat still on his head. Oh, how dirty, dilapidated, and unshaven he was! I felt too miserable with apprehension to emulate Narcisse's enthusiasm. It was cold. I opened the door of the stove to let the glowing heat come into the room. Blanquette went into the kitchen to prepare the coffee. Suddenly, Paragot leapt to his feet, cast his silk hat on the floor, and stamped it into a pancake. Then he thrust it into the stove and shut the door. "Voilà!" he cried. Before I could interfere, he had taken off his frock-coat, and holding one skirt in his hands and securing the other with his foot, had ripped it from waist to neck. He was going to burn this also when I stopped him. "Laissez-moi," said he impatiently. "It'll make such a horrid smell, master," said I. He threw the garment across the room with a laugh. "It is true." He stretched himself and waved his arms. "Ah, now I am better. Now I am Berzelius Nibidad Paragot again. Now I am free from the forms and symbols. Yes, my son, that hat has been to me Luke's iron crown. That coat has been the pain forte dur crushing my infinite soul into my liver." He tore off the black tie and hurled it away from him. "This has been strangling every noble inspiration. I have been swathed in mummy bands of convention. I have been dead. I have come to life. My lungs are full, my soul regains its limitless horizons. My swollen tongue is cool, and nom de Dieu, I can talk again." He walked up and down the little salon, vociferating his freedom, and kicking the remains of the frock-coat before him. With one of his sudden impulses, he picked it up and threw it out of a quickly opened window. The sight of it offended me, he explained. "Master," said I, "where are your other things?" "What other things?" "Your luggage, your greatcoat, your umbrella." "Why, at Melford," said he with an air of surprise. "Where else should they be?" I had thought that no action of Paragot could astonish me. I was wrong. I stared at him as stupefied as ever. "Usually people travel with their luggage," said I foolishly. "They are usual people, my son. I am not one of them. It came to a point where I must either expire or go. I decided not to expire. These things are done all in a flash. I was walking in the garden. It was last Sunday afternoon, I remember now, a sodden November day. Imagine a sodden November Sunday afternoon, English country town garden. Joanna was at a children's service. Ah, mon Dieu, the desolation of that Sunday afternoon! The death, my son, that was in the air! Ha! I choked, I struggled. The garden wall, the leaden sky closed in upon me. I walked out. I came back to Paris." "Just like that?" I murmured. "Just like that," said he. "You may have noticed, my son, that I am a man of swift decisions and prompt action. I walked to the railway station. A providential London train was expected in 5 minutes. I took it. Voilà." "Did you stay long in London?" I asked by way of saying something, for he began to pace up and down the room. "Did I see anything worth seeing at the theatres? And did I have a good crossing? My little Asticot, I perceive you have become an adept at conventional conversation. If you can't say something original, I shall go back to Boubou le Vanqueur, whose society for the last 3 days has afforded me infinite delectation." Although his views of life may be what Melford would call depraved, at any rate they are first-hand. He does not waste his time in futile politeness. Suddenly he paused, and seized me by the shoulder and shook me, as he had often done before. "Creep out of that shell of gentility, you little hermit crab," he cried, "and tell me how you would like to live in Melford for the rest of your natural life." "I shouldn't like it at all," said I. "Then how do you expect me to have liked it?" Blanquette entered, with the great white coffee jug and some thick cups, and set the tray on the oilskin-covered table. Seeing Paragot in his grubby shirt-sleeves, she looked around with her housewifely instinct of tidiness for the discarded garments. "Where are—" "Gone!" he shouted, waving his arms. "Cast into the flames, and rent in twain, and scattered to the winds of heaven." He laughed, seeing that she did not understand, and poured out a jorum of coffee. "The farcical comedy is over, Blanquette," said he gently. "I am a monsieur no longer. Do you see? We are going to live just as we did before you went away in the summer, and I am not going to be married. I am going to live with my little Blanquette for ever and ever, in saeculo saeculorum. Amen." She turned as white as the coffee jug. I thought she was about to faint, and caught her in my arms. She did not faint, but, burying her head against my shoulder, burst into a passion of tears. "What the devil's the matter?" asked Paragot. "Are you sorry I'm not going to be married?" "Mais non!" Blanquette sobbed out vehemently. "I think she's rather glad, master," said I. He put down his coffee-cup and laid his hands on her as if to draw her comfortingly away from me. "My dear child," he began. She shrank back. "Ah non, laissez-moi!" she cried, and bolted from the room. Paragot looked at me inquiringly and shrugged his shoulders. "The eternal feminine, I suppose. Blanquette like the rest of them." "It's odd you haven't noticed it before, master." "Noticed what?" I lit a cigarette. "The eternal feminine in Blanquette," I answered. "What the deuce do you mean?" "She was jealous even of my friendship with Madame de Verneuil," said I diplomatically, realizing that I was on the point of betraying Blanquette's confidences. "It never struck me that she was jealous," he remarked simply. He took his coffee-cup to the rickety sofa and sat down with the sigh of a tired man. I took mine to the chair by the stove, and we drank silently. I have never felt so hopelessly miserable in my life as I did that night. I was old enough, or perhaps rather I had gathered experience enough, to feel a shock of disgust at Paragot's return in volutare luti. In what sordid den had he found shelter these last days of reaction? I shuddered, and loving him, I hated myself for shuddering. Yet I understood. He was a man of extremes. Having fled from the intolerable virtues of Melford, with the nostalgia of the vagabond life devouring him like a flame, he could not have been expected to return tamely to the Rue des Saladiers. He plunged head foremost into the depths. But Boubou le Vainqueur? The Latin Quarter was not exactly a Sunday school. Very probably it flirted with Boubou's lady companions. But between Boubou and itself it raised an impassable barrier. The idyll, too, was over. He had left my dear Lady Joanna without drum or trumpet. As my destiny hung with his, I should never behold her adored face again. All the graciousness seemed suddenly to be swept out of my life. I pictured her, forsaken, heartbroken, for the second time, weeping bitterly over this repetition of history, and including me in her indictment of my master. At 19 we are all presumptuous egotists. If I mixed pity for myself with sorrow for Joanna and dismay for my master, I am not too greatly to be blamed. The best emotions of older, wiser, and better men than I are often blends of queer elements. Romance was dead. There was no more Joanna. I broke down and shed tears into my coffee-cup. Paragot snored. End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of The Beloved Vagabond by William John Locke. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 22. I spent the night on the sofa, as the only bed in the establishment belonged to Paragot. The next morning I took my scanty belongings to my old attic, which fortunately happened to be unlet, and left my master in undisturbed possession of his apartment. In the evening, calling to make polite inquiries as to his health, I found him still in bed, looking grimier and bristlier than the night before. "My son," said he, "the bread of liberty is sweet, but when you are starving you should not overeat yourself. An old French writer says, "Après le plaisir vient la peine, après la peine la vertu." I've had the pain that follows pleasure, but whether I shall attain the consequential virtue I don't know. For the present, however, I am condemned to it against my will. How so? I asked. I have a great desire to rise and seek the nepenthe of the Café Dauphine, but a whimsical fate keeps me coatless and hatless in a virtuous house. I am also comparatively shirtless, which does not so much matter. I'm afraid my things won't fit you, master, said I, sitting on the edge of the bed. The only coat which the good Blanquette has preserved is the pearl-buttoned velveteen jacket in which I fiddled away so many happy hours. Why not wear it until your bag arrives from Melford? In Arcadian villages, he replied, it commanded respect. In the Café Dauphine, I'm afraid it would only excite derision. Presently, a strong odour of onions gave promise of an approaching meal, and a little while afterwards Blanquette entered with the announcement that the soup was on the table. Paragot rose, donned trousers and slippers, and went forth into the salon to dine. Simplicity is one of the canons of high art. Life is an art, as I have endeavoured to teach you. Therefore, in life we should aim at simplicity. To complicate existence into the intricacy of a steam engine with white ties and red socks is an offence against art of which I will never again be guilty. It is also more comfortable to eat soup with your elbows on the table, n'est-ce pas, Blanquette? Bien sûr, she replied, bending over her bowl. Where else could one put them? This pleased Paragot, who continued to talk in high good humour during the rest of the meal. Afterwards he filled a new porcelain pipe which Blanquette had purchased, and smoked contentedly the rest of the evening. Blanquette sat dutifully on a straight-backed chair, her hands in her lap, listening, as she had so often done before, to our inspiring conversation, and adding her word whenever it entered the area of her comprehension. If we had lectured each other alternately on the integral calculus, Blanquette would have given us her rapt and happy attention. This evening she would not have minded our talking English. The mere sound of the master's voice was sweet, sweeter than ever, now that the other woman had been planted there. She thought of it with a fierce joy, and the master had come back to her for ever and ever, in saeculo saeculorum. Amen. Like many peasant women of strong nature, she had the terrible passion of possession. In her soul she would rather have had the most degraded of Paragots in her arms, as her own unalienable property, than have seen him honourable and prosperous in the arms of another. Had she been of a nervous and emotional temperament, there might have been tragedy in the Rue des Saladiers, and the newspapers of Paris might have chronicled yet another crime passionnel, and the appearance of Blanquette before a weeping jury. But the days of tragedy were over. Paragot thundered invectives against insincerity in art. We were discussing my famous mythological picture still on the easel of Ménilmontant, and Blanquette beamed approval. She remarked, referring to my picture, that she didn't like so many unclad ladies. It was not decent. Besides, if they lay in the grass like that, they would catch cold. And they have no pocket-handkerchiefs to blow their noses, cried Paragot. Whereat Blanquette's sense of humour being tickled, she screamed with laughter. Narcisse sprang from sleep and barked, and there reigned great happiness, in which even I, still reproachful of my master, had my share. "What a thing it is to be at home!" observed Paragot. I've never heard him utter so domestic a sentiment. After pleasure follows pain, and after pain comes virtue. This is virtue with a vengeance, I reflected cynically. Bien sûr, was Blanquette's inevitable response. When she bade us good night, Paragot drew her down and kissed her cheek, which was an unprecedented mark of domesticity. Blanquette turned brick red, and I suppose her foolish heart beat wildly. I have known my own heart to beat wildly for far less, and I am not a woman, but I have been in love. It is because you belong to me, my little Blanquette, and I am among mine own people. We understand one another, don't we? Et tout comprendre, c'est tout pardonner. When she had gone, he smoked reflectively for a few moments. I never realized till now, said he, the sense of stability and comfort that Blanquette affords me. She is unchangeable. God has given her a sense whereby she has pierced to the innermost thing that is I, and externals don't matter. She has got nearer the true Paragot than you, my son, although I know you love me." "What is the true Paragot, master?" I asked. "Well, there are only two that know it, Blanquette and the bon Dieu. I don't." "I only know," said I, "that I owe my life to you, and that I love you more than anyone else in the world." "Even more than Madame de Verneuil?" he asked with a smile. I blushed. "She is different," said I. "Quite different," he assented after a long pause. "My son," he added, "it is right that you should know why the end came. One generally keeps these things to oneself, but I see you are blaming me, and a barrier may grow up between us which we should both regret. You think I have treated your dear lady most cruelly." "I can't judge you, master," said I, terribly embarrassed. "But you do," said he. Paragot was in one of his rare gentle moods. He spoke softly, without a trace of reproach or irony. He spoke, too, lying pipe in mouth on the old rep sofa, instead of walking about the room. He told me his story. Need I repeat it? They had escaped a lifelong misery, but on the other hand they had lost a lifelong dream. She was still in his eyes all that is beautiful and exquisite in woman, but she was not the woman that Berlioz' Nebidad Paragot could love. The twain had been romantic, walking in the valley of illusion, wilfully blinding their eyes to the irony of things real. Love had flown far from them during the silent years, and they had mistaken the afterglow of his wings for the living radiance. They had begun to realize the desolate truth. They read it in each other's eyes. She had been too loyal to speak. She would have married him, hoping as a woman hopes, against hope. Paragot, whose soul revolted from pretense, preferring real mire to sham down, fled from the piteous tragedy. He might have retired more conventionally. He might have had a dismal explanatory interview with Joanna, and ordered a fly to convey himself and his luggage to the railway station the next morning. Perhaps if Joanna had found him in the November Sunday afternoon garden, this might have occurred. Joanna did not find him. His temperament found him instead. And when you have a temperament like Paragot's, it plays the very deuce with convention. It drew him out of the garden, across the Channel, and into the society of Boupou-le-Vanqueur. But all the same, in the essential act of leaving Melford, Paragot behaved like the man of fine honour I shall always maintain him to be. How many men of speckless reputation, though feeling the pinch of poverty, would not have married Joanna for the great wealth her husband left behind? Answer me that. I know that Joanna wept bitterly over her lost romance, but she has owned to me that the words written on a scrap of paper by Paragot and posted from London were tragically true. My dear, it is only the shadows of our past selves that love. You and I are strangers to each other. To continue this sweet pretence of love is a mockery of the holiest. God bless you. Gaston. "If you love a dream woman," said Paragot, "let her stay the divine woman of the dream. To awaken and clasp flesh and blood, no matter how delicately tender, and find that love has sped at the dawn, is a misery too deep for tears." And Paragot, lying unshaven, unwashed, in grimy shirt and trousers, smoked silently, and stared into a future in which the dear, sweet, dream woman, with the little feet so adored, would never, never again have a place. "If I had a coat to my back," said he, after nearly half an hour's silence, "I verily believe I would go to the Pont Neuf and talk to Henri IV. Le Fou Rire had given me a commission for a front page in colours, and I was deep in the disreputable task on the following evening when Paragot appeared in my attic. He wore a jacket, his bag having arrived from Melford. "My soul hungers," said he, "for the Café Delphine, and my throat thirsts for sociable alcohol. If you can cease the prostitution of your art to a salacious public for an hour or two, I shall be very glad of your company." "I think it's rather good," said I complacently, regarding the drawing with head bent sideways. "It's an old theme, but it's up to date. At Janot's they would say it was palpitating with modernity." "That's what makes it vile," said Paragot. We were thrown into immediate argument. One of the flying art notions of the hour was to revive the old subjects which contained the eternal essentials of life and present them in palpitatingly modern form. I eloquently developed my thesis. We were sick to death, for instance, of the quasi-scriptural prodigal son sitting half naked in a desert beside a swine trough. Was it not more palpitating to set the prodigal in modern Paris? Your moderns can't palpitate with dignity, my son, replied Paragot. Take Susanna and the Elders. Classically treated, the subject might yet produce one of the greatest pictures of all time. Translate it into The Grocer's Wife and The Two Churchwardens, and you cannot escape from bestial vulgarity. Conscious of the wide horizon of extreme youth, I sighed at my master's narrowness. He was hopelessly behind the times. I dropped the argument and hunted for my cap. We found the Café Delphine fairly full. Madame Boin, whom the past few months had provided with a few more rolls of fat round her neck, gave a little gasp as she caught sight of Paragot, and held out her hand over the counter. "Is it really you, Monsieur Paragot? One sees you no more. How is that? But it is charming. Ah, you have been en voyage. In England? On dit que c'est beau là-bas. And where will you sit? Your place is taken. It is Monsieur Papillard, the poet, who has sat there for a month. We'll find another table. There is one that is free." He pointed to a draughty, unconsidered table by the door. Paragot looked at it, then at Madame Boin, and then at his own private and particular table, usurped by Monsieur Papillard and his associates, and swore a stupefied oath of considerable complication. A weird, pug-nosed, pig-eyed creature with a goatee beard, scarce masking a receding chin, sat in the sacred seat against the wall. His hat and cloak were hung on Paragot's peg. He was reading a poem to half a dozen youths who seemed all to be drinking mazagrin, or coffee in long glasses. They combined an air of intellectual intensity with one of lyrical enthusiasm, like little owls pretending to be larks. Not one of the old set was there to smile a welcome. We stood by the counter listening to the poem. When Monsieur Papillard had ended, the youths broke into applause. "C'est superbe! Un chef d'œuvre, cher maître!" Called the pug-nosed creature cher maître. "It is demented idiocy," murmured my astounded master. At that moment entered Félicien Garbure, a down-at-heel elderly man who had been wont to sit at Paragot's table. He was one of those parasitic personages not unknown in the quartier, who contrived to attach themselves to the special circle of a café, and to drink as much as possible at other people's expense. His education and intelligence would have disgraced a Paris cabman, but an ironical providence had invested him with an air of wisdom, which gave to his flattery the value of profound criticism. This sycophant greeted us with effusion. Where have we been? Why had the delightful band been dispersed? Did we know Monsieur Papillard, the great poet? Before we could reply, he approached the chair. "Cher maître, permit me to present to you my friends Monsieur Paragot and Monsieur Asticot." "Enchanté, monsieur," said the great poet urbanely. We likewise avowed our enchantment, and Paragot swore beneath his breath. The waiter, no longer Hercule, who had been dismissed for petty thievery some time before, but a new waiter who did not know Paragot, set us chairs at the end of the table, far away from the great man. We ordered drinks. Paragot emptied his glass in an absent-minded manner, still under the shock of his downfall. But a few short months ago he had ruled in this place as king. Now he was patronizingly presented to the snub-nosed idiot usurper by Félicien Garbure. His friend, Basilio Paragot? Nom de Dieu! And he was assigned a humble place below the salt. Verily, the world was upside down. "Give me another grog," said Paragot, "a double one." The poet read another poem. It was something about topazes and serpents and the twilight and the pink palms of a negress. More I could not gather. The company hailed it as another masterpiece. Félicien Garbure called it a supreme effort of genius. The young man beside Paragot vaunted its witchery of suggestion. "It is absolute nonsense," cried my master. "But it is symbolism, monsieur," replied the young man in a tone of indulgent pity. "What does it mean?" The young man, he was very kind, smiled and shrugged his shoulders politely. "What, in common speech, is the meaning of one of Bach's fugues or Claude Monet's effects of sunlight? One cannot say. They appeal direct to the soul. So does a subtle harmony of words, using words as notes of music, or pigments, what you will, arranged by the magic of a master. These things are transcendental, monsieur." "Sapperlipopette," breathed Paragot. "My little Asticot," he whispered to me, "have I really come to this, to sit at the feet of an acting prose sub vice deputy infant Gamaliel, and be taught the elements of symbolic poetry?" "But, master," said I, somewhat captivated by the balderdash, "there is, after all, colour in words. Don't you remember how delighted you were with the name of the little town we passed through on our way to Orleans? Romorantin? You were haunted by it, and said it was like the purple note of an organ." "It shows you, my son, that I was aware of the jargon of symbolism before these goslings were hatched," he replied. He drained his tumbler, called the waiter, and paid the reckoning. "Let us go to Père Louvio's in the Halles, where we can meet some real men and women." We went, and the Café Delphine knew Paragot no more. After this he took to frequenting indiscriminately the various cafés of the neighbourhood, wandering from one to the other like a lost soul seeking a habitation. Now and again he hit upon fragments of the old band who had migrated from the Café Delphine when it became the home of the symbolic poets. He tried in vain to collect the fragments together in a new hostelry, but the cohesive force had gone. These queer circles of the Latin Quarter are organisms of spontaneous growth. You cannot create them artificially or recreate them when once they are disintegrated. The twos and threes of students received him kindly and listened to his talk, but his authority was gone. Once or twice when I accompanied him, I fancied that he had lost also the peculiar magic of his vehement utterances. Cazalet also noticed a change. "What is the matter with Paragot? He no longer talks, he preaches. Ça nuit à la fin." Paragot a bore? It was unimaginable. Was he paying the penalty of his past respectability? Had Melford repressed his noble rage and frozen the genial current of his soul? It is not unlikely. He often found himself condemned to solitary toping over a stained newspaper, one of the most ungleeful joys known to man. Sometimes he played dominoes with Félicien Gabure, now icily received by the symbolists on account of an unpaid score. Whether desperation drove him occasionally to Boubou Levancoeur and his friends, I do not know. He was not really proud of his acquaintances with Boubou. Once he whimsically remarked that as he was halfway between Gaston de Nerac and Berzelius Paragot, and therefore neither fish nor fowl, he could not find an appropriate hole in Paris. When his hair and his beard and his fingernails had attained their old luxuriance of growth, and he was in every way Paragot again, the desired haven remained still unfindable. There were taverns without number and drink in oceans, and the life of Paris surged up and down the boulevards as stimulating as ever. But the heart of Paragot cried out for something different. He took the old violin from its dirty case and spent hours in the Rue des Saladiers trying to fiddle the divine despair out of his system. Sometimes he would call upon Blanquette to accompany him on her almost forgotten zither. One day he was with me at the café opposite Jeannot's, when 2 or 3 of the studio came in and sat at our table. There was the usual eager talk. The subject, the new impressionism. "But to understand it you must be in the movement," cried Fougère, not dreaming of discourtesy. But Paragot took the saying to heart. "I see it now," said he afterwards. "I am no longer in the movement. You young men have passed me by. I am left stranded. You may ask why I don't seek the company of my own contemporaries. Who are they that know me, save worthless rags like Félicien Gabure? Stranded, my son. I have had my day." After that he refused to talk at such social gatherings as chance afforded, and moodily listened while he consumed profitless alcohol. Then he began to frequent the low-life cafes of the Halles. When he had nearly poisoned himself with vile absinthe and sickened himself with the conversation of fishwives, he sent for me in despair. I found him, half-dressed, walking up and down the salon. He looked very ill. "I am going to leave Paris today," he began, as soon as I entered. "It is a city of Dead Sea apples. It has no place for me, save the sewer. I don't like the sewer. I'm going away. I shall never come back to Paris again." "But where are you going, master?" I asked in some surprise. He did not know. He would pack his bundle and flee like Christian from the accursed city. Like Christian, he would go on a pilgrim's progress. He would seek sweet, pure things. He would go forth and work in the fields. The old life had come to an end. The sow had been mistaken. It could not return to its wallowing in the mire. Wallowing was disgustful. Was ever man in such a position? The vagabond life had made the conventions of civilization impossible. The contact with convention and clean English ways had killed his zest for the old order, of which only the mud remained. There was nothing for it but to leave Paris. He poured out his heart to me in a torrent of excited words, here and there none too coherent. He must work. He had lost the great art by which he was to cover Europe with palaces. That was no longer. "My God," said he, stopping short, "the true knowledge of it has only come to me lately. I was living in a fool's paradise. I could never have designed a building. I should have lived on her bounty. Thank God I was saved the shame of it." He went on. Again he repeated his intention of leaving Paris. I must look after Blanquette for the present. He must go and dree his weird alone. "And yet, my little Asticot, it is the dreadful loneliness that frightens me. Once I had a dream. It sufficed me. But now my soul is empty. A man needs a woman in his life, even a dream woman. But for me, nini, c'est fini. There is not a woman in the wide world who would look at me now." "Master," said I, "you are going to settle down in the country. Why don't you marry Blanquette?" "Marry Blanquette? He regarded me in simple, undisguised amazement which took his breath away. He passed his hand through his hair and sat on the nearest seat. "Nom de Dieu," said he, "I never thought of it." Then he leaped up and caught me in the old way by the shoulders and cried in French, as he did in moments of great excitement, "But it's colossal, that idea! It is the solution of everything. And I never thought of it, though it has been staring me in the face. Why, I love her, our little Blanquette. I have loved her all the time, without knowing it, as the good Monsieur Jourdain spoke prose. Sacre nom d'un petit bonhomme! Why didn't you tell me before, confounded little animal that you are?" He swung me with a laugh to the other side of the room, and waved his arms grotesquely, as he continued his dithyrambic eulogy of the colossal idea. I have never seen 2 minutes produce a greater change in a human countenance. 10 years fell from it. He looked even younger than when he had broken his fiddle over Mr. Pogson's head and received the inspiration of our vagabondage. His blue eyes cleared, and in them shone the miraculous light of laughter. "But it was written, my son Asticot. It was preordained. She is the one woman in the world to whom I need not pretend to be other than I am. She is real, nom de Dieu. What she says is Blanquette, what she does is Blanquette, and her sayings and doings would grace the greatest queen in Christendom. But have you thought of it? I have come indeed to the end of my journey. I started out to find truth, the reality of things. I have found it. I have found it, my son. It is a woman, strong and steadfast, who looks into your eyes, who can help a man to accomplish his destiny. And the destiny of man is to work and to beget strong children. And his reward is to have the light in the wife's eyes and the welcome of a child's voice as he crosses the threshold of his house. And it cleanses a man. But Blanquette!" He smote his forehead and burst into excited laughter. "Why did it not enter into this idiot head before?" The laughter ceased all of a sudden, and at least 3 years returned to his face. "It takes 2 parties to make a marriage," said he in a chastened tone. "Blanquette is young. I am not. She may be thinking of a future quite different. It is all very well to say I will marry Blanquette, but will Blanquette marry me?" "Master," said I, feeling a person of elderly experience, "it was entirely on your account that Blanquette refused the quincaillier at the corner of the street." I had learned from her the day before that the superior hardware merchant had recently made her a ceremonious offer of marriage. "Well, a sense of duty, perhaps," said Paragot. I laughed at his seriousness. "But, master, she's been eating her heart out for you since the wedding at Chambéry." "Asticot," said he, planting himself in front of me, "are you jesting or speaking what you know to be the truth?" "The absolute truth." "And you never told me? You knew that a real woman loved me, and you let me chase a will-o'-the-wisp with gloves and an umbrella? Truly a man's foes are of his own household." "But, master," I began. He laughed at the sight of my dejected face. "No, you were loyal, my son. The man who gives away a woman's confidence, even when she avows the poisoning of her husband and the strangulation of her babes, is a transpontine villain." He took up his porcelain pipe and filled it with the blue packet of caporal that lay on the table with the oilskin cover. He struck a match and was about to apply it to the bowl, when one of the sudden ideas caused him to blow out the match and lay down the pipe. Then, with his old lightning swiftness, he strode to the door and flung it open. "Blanquette! Blanquette!" he cried. "Oui, maître," came from the kitchen, and in a moment Blanquette entered the room. He took her by the hand and led her to the centre, while she regarded him somewhat mystified. With his heels together he made her a correct bow. "Blanquette," said he, "in the presence of Asticot as witness, I ask you to do me the honour to become my wife." It was magnificent. It was what Paragot would have called vieille école, but it was not tactful. It was half an hour before Blanquette fully grasped the situation. End of chapter 22. Chapter 23 of The Beloved Vagabond by William John Locke. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 23. Joanna married Major Walters as soon as the conventionalities would permit. She wrote then, for the first time, to Paragot. "I bear you no malice, my dear Gaston, and I am sure you bear me none. Your breaking off of our engagement was the only way out of a fantastic situation. You might have broken it less abruptly, but you were always sudden. If I may believe Asticot, your own marriage was a lightning incident. I can laugh now, and so, I suppose, can your wife. But believe me, this sort of thing does leave a woman rather breathless. Wish me happiness, as I wish you. If ever we meet, it will be as loyal friends." Could woman have spoken more sweetly? "My dear Joanna," replied Paragot, "I do wish you all the happiness in the world. You can't fail to have it. You have a real husband, as I have a real wife. Let us thank heaven we have escaped from the moon vapour of the ideal, in which we poor humans are apt to lose our way and stray God knows whither. I am sending you a real marriage gift." "My dear Asticot," wrote Joanna from an hotel in Florence, "what do you think your delightful but absurd master has sent me as a wedding present? It arrived here this morning, to the consternation of the whole hotel. A crate containing 6 live ducks. The label stated that they were real ducks fed by his own hand. But what am I to do with 6 live ducks on a wedding journey, my dear Asticot? I can't sell them. I hate the idea of eating them, and even if I didn't, Major Walters and I can't eat 6. And I can't put blue ribbons round their necks and carry them about with me on my travels as pets. Can't you see me walking over the Ponte Vecchio, followed by them as by a string of poodles? And they are so voracious. The hotel people are already charging them full pension terms. Oh dear, do tell me what I am to do with these dreadful fowl." "My dearest lady," I answered, "offer the ducks like the Dumbo flitch of bacon to the most happily married couple in Florence." Whether Joanna acted on my brilliant suggestion, I cannot say. A little while ago I inquired after their ultimate destiny, but Joanna had forgotten. I believe Major Walters and herself fled from them secretly. Paragot, on his label, stated that he had fed the ducks with his own hand. This was practically true. Indeed, in the case of those who declined to nourish themselves to the requisite degree of fatness, it was literally true. I have beheld him since perform the astounding operation, a sight dis omnibusque, but not in the Rue des Saladiers. It was on his own farm, the farm near Chartres, which he bought, in his bewildering fashion, as soon as lawyers could prepare the necessary documents. He took train the day after his proposal of marriage to Blanquette, and returned, I remember, somewhat crestfallen, because he could not conclude the purchase then and there. "My dear sir," said the lawyer whom he consulted, "you can't buy landed property as you can a pound of sugar over a counter." "Why not?" asked Paragot. "Because," said the lawyer, "the law of France mercifully concedes to men of my profession the right of gaining a livelihood." "I see that you are a real lawyer," said Paragot, pleased by the irony, "and it is an amiable providence that has guided my steps to your cabinet." But Paragot was married, and the little appartement in the Rue des Saladiers passed into alien hands, and the newly wedded pair settled down on the farm, long before all the legal formalities of purchase were accomplished. It takes my breath away even now to think of the hurry of those days. He decided human destinies in the fraction of a second. "My son," said he, "when I have paid for this farm, I shall have very little indeed of the capital on the interest of which we have been living. I am now a married man, with the responsibilities of a wife and a future family. I have put £200 to your credit at the Crédit Lyonnais, and that is all your fortune. If art can't support you, when you have spent it, you will have to come to La Haye, the farm, and feed pigs. You'll be richer if you paint them. The piggier they are, and the heavier the gold watch chains across their bellies, the richer you will be. But you'll be happier if you feed them. Crede expertioro." I went to bed that night swearing a great oath that I would neither paint pigs nor feed pigs, but that I would prove myself worthy of the generosity of my master and benefactor. I felt then that his goodness was great, but how great it was I only realized in after years, when I came to learn his financial position. Bearing in mind the relativity of things, I know that few fathers have sent their sons out into the world with so princely a capital. Fortune smiled on me. Why, I don't know. Perhaps because I was small and sandy-haired and harmless, and did not worry her. I sold 2 or 3 pictures, I obtained regular employment on an illustrated journal, and raised my price for contributions to Le Fourrier. Bread and butter were assured. There was never a prouder youth than I when, one August morning, I started from Paris for Chartres, with 50 superfluous pounds in my pocket, which I determined to restore to Paragot. The old Paragot of the high roads, hairy and bronzed, and wearing a great straw hat with wide brim turned down, met me at the little local station. He forgot that he was half British, and almost hugged me. At last I had come. It was my 3rd visit. At last I had torn myself away from that sacre Paris and its flesh-pots and its paint-pots and its artificialities. Nothing is real in Paris, whether it be the smile on the painted lady's lips or the dream of the young poet. Here, in the midst of God's fields, there is no pretending, no shamming, no lying, none of your confounded idealism. All is solid, mon gars, solid like that." And he thumped his chest to illustrate the argument. "Bucephal, too?" I queried with a laugh, as he fetched up beside the most ancient horse in the department, drooping between the shafts of a springless cart. Needless to say, Bucephal had been rechristened in his extreme old age. "He is the living proof," cried Paragot, "of the solidity rerum agrestium. Look at him. Show me a horse of his age in Paris. The Paris horses, like youth in the poem, grow pale and spectre-thin and die of premature decay. Here, mon petit," said he, giving a sou to a blue-bloused urchin who was restraining the impetuous Bucephal from a wild gallop over the Eure et Loire. "When you have spent that, come to La Haye, and I will give you another." I threw my bag into the cart, and we took our places on the plank that served as a seat. "En route, Bucephal!" cried Paragot, gathering up the reins. "Observe the kindly manners of the country. If I had addressed him like your Paris cabman with a 'cocotte,' it would have wounded his susceptibilities." Bucephal started off jog-trot down the straight white road edged with poplars, while Paragot talked, and the sun blazed down upon us from a cobbled sky. All around, the fertile plain laughed in the sunshine, a giant, contented laugh, like that of its broad-faced, broad-hipped daughters, who greeted Paragot as we raced by at the rate of 5 miles an hour. "Did I ever meet a Paris horse that went this speed?" asked Paragot, and I answered him truthfully, "Never." We stopped in a white-walled, red-roofed village beside a tiny shop gloriously adorned with a gilt bull's head. The butcher's wife came out. "Bonjour, Monsieur Paragot." "Bonjour, Madame Jolivet. Have you a nice fatted calf for this young prodigal from Paris? If you haven't, we could do with 4 kilos of good beef." And the result of 10 minutes' talk was a great lump of raw meat, badly wrapped in newspaper, which Paragot, careless of my Paris clothes, thrust on my knees, while he continued to drive Bucephal. I dropped the beef into the back of the cart. Paragot shook his head. "Tomorrow, my son, you shall be clothed in humility, and shall clean out the cow-pen." "I should prefer to accept your original invitation, master," said I, "and help with the corn." For Paragot, besides Bucephal and cows and ducks and pigs and fowls and a meadow or two, possessed a patch of cornfield of which he was passionately proud. He had sown it himself that spring, and now was harvest. He pointed to it with his whip as soon as we came in sight of the farm. "My corn, my little Asticot, it is marvellous, eh? Who says that Berzelius Nibidad Paragot can't make things grow? I was born to it. Nom de Dieu, I can make anything grow. I could plant your palette and it would come up a landscape. And, sacre mille cochons, I've done the most miraculous thing of all. I am the father of a human being, a real live human being, my son. He is small as yet," he added apologetically, "but still he is alive. He has teeth, Asticot. It is the most remarkable thing in this astonishing universe." The dim form of a woman standing with a child in her arms in front of a group of farm buildings across the fields to the right gradually grew into the familiar figure of my dear Blanquette. She came down the road to meet us, her broad, homely face beaming with gladness, and in her eyes a new light of welcome. Narcisse trotted at her heels. The rheumatism of advancing years gave him a distinguished gait. He sprang from the cart. Bucephal, left to himself, regarded the family meeting with a grandfatherly air, until an earth-coloured nondescript emerged from the ground and led him off towards the house. After our embraces we followed, Paragot dancing the delighted infant, Blanquette with her great motherly arm around my shoulders, and Narcisse soberly sniffing for adventure after the manner of elderly dogs. "Do you remember, Asticot?" said Blanquette. "4 of us started for Chambéry. Now 5 of us come to La Haye. C'est drôle, hein?" "Tu es contente?" I asked. Her arm tightened and her eyes grew moist. "Mais oui," she said in a low voice. Then she looked at Paragot and the child, a yard or 2 in front of us. "He is the image of his father," she said almost reverentially. I burst out laughing. Where the likeness lay between the chubby, snub-nosed, 18-months-old baby and the hairy, battered Paragot, no human eye but Blanquette's could discover. I vowed he resembled a little Japanese idol. "Pauvre chérie," said Blanquette, motherwise. The house of Paragot was not a palace. It stood low and whitewashed amid a medley of little tumble-down erections, and was guarded on one side by cowsheds, on the other by the haystack. You stepped across the threshold into the kitchen. A door on the right gave access to the bedroom. A ladder connected with a hole in the roof enabled you to reach the cock-loft, the guest room of the establishment. That was all. "What on earth could man want more?" asked Paragot. The old rep suite, the table with the American cloth, the coloured prints in gilt frames including the portrait of Garibaldi, the cheap deal bookcases holding Paragot's tattered classics, gave the place an air of familiar homeliness. A mattock, a gun, and a cradle warred against old associations. When we entered, the child began to whimper. Perhaps it did not approve of the gun. Like myself, he may, in trembling fancy, have heard its owner cry, "I have an inspiration. Let us go out and shoot cows." Paragot found another reason. "That infant's life is a perpetual rebellion against his name. I chose Triptoleme, a beautiful name. If you look at him, you could see it written all over him. Blanquette was crazy for Thomas. In indignation I swore he should be christened Triptoleme Onésime." Blanquette wept. I yielded. At least let me call him Didyme, I pleaded. Didyme? There's nothing caressing about Didyme. Repeat it. Didyme. But no, Blanquette wept louder. She wept so loud that all the ducks ran in to see whether I was murdering her. It is not true, protested Blanquette. How can you say those things? You know they are not true. Her state was so terrible, continued my master, that I sacrificed my son's destiny. Behold, Thomas. I too would howl if I had such a name. He is hungry, said Blanquette, and it is a very pretty name. He likes to hear it. N'est-ce pas, mon petit tom-tom chéri? There, he smiles. She is really convinced that he has heard her call him Thomas. Oh, woman, said Paragot. That evening, after we had feasted on cabbage soup and the piece of beef which I had been too stuck up to dandle on my knees, and clear brown cider, the three of us sat outside the house in the warm August moonlight. Sinking into an infinitely far horizon stretched the fruitful plain of France, cornland and pasture, and near us the stacked sheaves of Paragot's corn stood quiet and pregnant symbols of the good earth's plenty. Here and there dark patches of orchard dreamed in a haze. Through one distant patch a farmhouse struck a muffled note of grey. On the left the ribbon of road glistened white between the sentinel poplars silhouetted against the sky. The hot smell of the earth filled the air like spice. 1,000 elfin sounds, the vibration of leaves, the tiny crackling of cornstalks, the fairy whir of ground insects, melted into a companionable stillness. Blanquette half dozed, her head against Paragot's shoulder, as she had done that far-off evening of our return from Chambéry. The smoke from his porcelain pipe curled upwards through the still air. I was near enough to him on the other side for him to lay his hand on my arm. "My son," he whispered in English, "I was right when I said I had come to the end of my journey. Eventually I am right in everything. I prophesied that I would make little Augustus Smith a scholar and a gentleman. Te voilà! I knew that my long pilgrimage would ultimately lead me to the inner shrine. Isn't all this," he waved his pipe in a circular gesture, "the holy of holies of the real? Is there any illusion in the unutterable poetry of the night? Is there anything false in this promise of the fruitful earth? My God, Asticot, I am happy. When the soul laughs, tears come into the eyes. I have all that the heart of man can desire, the love of this dear wife of mine, the child asleep within doors, the printed wisdom of the world in a dozen tongues of men, caught up haphazard in what I once, in a failing hour, thought was my wild goose chase after truth. The pride in you, my little Asticot, the son of my adoption, and the most overpowering sleepiness that ever sat upon mortal eyelid." He yawned. I protested. It was barely 9 o'clock. "It is bedtime," said Paragot. "We have to get up at 5. "Good heavens, master," said I, "why these unearthly hours?" He laughed and quoted Candide. "Il faut cultiver notre jardin." "No," said the drowsy Blanquette, at last understanding the conversation. "We have to cut the rest of the corn." "It's all the same, my dear," said Paragot tenderly. "We were talking philosophy. Philosophy merely means the love of wisdom. And all that the wisdom of all the ages can tell us is summed up in the last words of one of the wisest books that ever was written. We must cultivate our garden." But how my dear erratic master has managed for years and years to cultivate the farm of LOCKE, and to bring up my godson in the fear of the Lord and the practice of land surveying, is a proof that the late Mr. Matthew Arnold was hopelessly wrong in his categorical declaration that miracles do not happen. End of chapter 23. End of The Beloved Vagabond by William John Locke.